Well, now this looks like another Confessions podcast. Thank you for downloading another audio array of terrible tales from the Sinful Radio 2 listener. This week we offer you an absurd alarm assault, a sizzling science session, a veritable varnishing, and an ill-timed, impertinent intrusion. Here we go. And we got a good one here from, who are we calling? This is from Robert. Robert, thank you very much. Simon, Capricious Collective, this is for you. This story was inspired by your recent naked lady on the train confession, which makes it sound a lot more racy than it was. She was just changing, and it happened to be going through a sleepy station in France, and some guys saw what they weren't supposed to see. Anyway, I hope this is suitable for broadcasting, if you deem it fit for purpose. I suspect it might arouse the wrath of Matt, says Robert. In 1971, I flew, courtesy of a credit card company, to Milan with my girlfriend, Rosie. And then we got a train to Medina, where we were going to pick up a new car. It was extremely hot. We'd arranged to stay at a smart hotel called the Real Finney. And for some ridiculous reason, thinking it was a Catholic country, I had booked 2 separate rooms. One for me and one for Rosie, because I didn't want anyone to take offence.
Different times.
Very different times. Do they not do that in Italy? Are they quite happy with that in Italy now? Okay.
Happy with it.
We arrived in the afternoon and were shown to our respective rooms by the elderly hotel porter, who had a hunchback and a pronounced limp, you might like to know, with a shuffling kind of gait when he was walking. And he spoke no English. We were on the same floor, but my room was at the front of the building and Rosie's was down a corridor, round a corner and right at the back of the building. Rosie, I have to tell you, was hot, sticky and dusty after our trip, and she decided to have a bath. Now, in those days, the hotel had a peculiar kind of short hip bath with a seat fixed in it. Above it, and stretching the length of the bath, was what she took to be a washing line, so she decided to wash her underwear and hung them up on the line to dry. However, Father Simon, she didn't realise that this line was in fact an alarm cord. And she had just operated it by hanging her knickers on it, until she heard the door bursting open and the porter kind of rush shuffling into the bathroom, and where he cried, "Nuda, nuda!" when he saw her. That's N-U-D-A. Does that work?
Yeah, that works.
There you are. See, you're looking
Nude
doubtful.
Lady.
Oh, is that what it means?
Nude lady.
Nude
yes.
lady.
Nude lady.
So he could spot one, see?
Nude lady.
He might have been a shuffler, but he could spot a nude lady when he saw one standing in the bath. Rosie managed to grab a towel and, wrapping it around herself, she shooed the porter out of the apartment before phoning me to tell me what had happened. I told her to come over to my room. Rosie was still tousled and damp from the bath, and I suggested she made herself at home in my room for a while. Time passes.
Yeah.
Now, you should know, Father Simon, that the bed's headboard had a space-age kind of control panel. Well, it was space-age for the 1970s. It had switches everywhere. Lying on the bed, I reached for the control panel to turn off the lights. The switch clicked, but the light stayed on. I looked again at what I presumed was the light switch to see, in fact, it had a faint bell symbol on it.
Again.
Not again.
It was another alarm. Then, to our horror, a moment or two later, we heard the shuffle of the porter's feet coming down the corridor. In dismay, Rosie and I looked at each other, and as I heard the porter's key turn in the lock, I fled to the bathroom, leaving Rosie, who I should mention, due to the heat of the day, was again naked, to face the porter, again, 5 minutes after seeing her naked in another room. He did a comedy double take, apparently, before being shooed out again by Rosie, who was getting used to this kind of thing. Luckily, I think the porter thought we were German, and we got some odd looks from the hotel staff until we checked out the next day. Obviously, if you...
What? Hang on.
Why Germans do this?
Oh, really?
It's a very, very standard thing. We've all been on holiday when they've been Germans.
Okay.
You should have worn more clothes. That's just the way it is.
No stereotypes.
No stereotypes,
none whatsoever, it turns
but
out.
I think some people are nodding again.
Oh, really?
Anyway, now for my confession, says Robert. Having paid by card for the trip, I was, for some reason or other, never actually charged. It was one of the old-fashioned ones where the payslip had to be put through a card machine. I think in view of the time that has elapsed since, I hope the card company and the collective will forgive me for not bringing this to their attention before this confession. I also hope the old guy wasn't too traumatised by his experience and didn't get the wrong idea about Rosie. who kept on appearing naked. Wherever he went, there was Rosie, standing there with no clothes on. Nuda. Okay, so it's Robert and Rosie on this confession. What do you think, sister, about it?
That's a real slapstick confession, isn't it?
It is.
I
It's
loved
a sitcom there.
Hilarious. I think I can forgive Rosie for sort of thinking that the cord above the shower was for hanging things, just about. But I can't really forgive Robert or Rosie, whoever it was who pressed the bell with a bell on it, because that's just not very bright.
How about Robert dashing into the bathroom?
Yeah, well, that too.
Leaving Rosie on her own.
Rather than him trying to... Why did he run away? Why didn't he just open the door and say, it's fine, we just pressed the wrong button? So for that, I can't forgive, sorry.
He's a coward. What do you think there, Sister Bobby? She's from the Priory.
Short, sharp and concise. I don't understand why the porter on the second time let himself into the room, because surely you ring a bell for attention. That doesn't mean come in, does it?
Well, it could be an emergency.
But I'm not. No, I think actually the washing on the line completely forgivable, and even the porter really should have knocked first at least until he got an enter.
So
surely
it's the porter's fault.
It's the porter's fault. The second time he saw a nuda.
Well, this is an education, this feature.
It is. The porter is clearly a bit of a say what you see. I see a nude lady, I'm going to say nude lady. I'm not going to say anything else. I'll just say what I see. I love that. Also, turns out that all the people who stayed in this hotel were obviously very highly strung because they needed alarms in every room they went into. There has to be something I can press or pull or rest on, and that will bring members of staff scurrying to my room. So for that reason, I am going to forgive, because obviously this is a bit of a hotel for strange people.
You would think that maybe that the porter guy would go, "Oh, I'm sorry," and go away again, rather than just state what he's looking at.
Yes.
It's a rather strange reaction.
It is a nude lady. There it is, a
Well
nude
done.
lady.
Okay, so here comes tonight's confession. Gather round, everybody. Tim from Barnsley sends in tonight's one. And there's a kind of a National Science Week thing going on. It's National Science Week has finished, but this is in that vibe. Thank you, Tim. Dear Father Simon and the Dean and the chapter, before proceeding with my confession, I must make it clear that no one involved in this story was in any way injured.
Oh, that's a good start.
Although
like
a few may still to this day suffer the odd flashback or nightmare, but I ask your forgiveness for an episode that really wasn't my fault. Or maybe it was a little. My story goes back to the early 80s when I was a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed schoolboy of about 13. One day our student science teacher, Doc White, announced that he'd arranged for a local science boffin to come to school for an amazing science presentation called Fire and Ice Whiz Bang Flash. And he promised it was the most spectacular science we had ever seen. Gas explosions, pyrotechnics, dry ice showers, and much, much more. On the day of Fire and Ice, we all marched into the main hall and took our seats cross-legged on the floor. Doc White introduced our host, who was called, strangely, Dr. Amazing. And he wore the regulation brown corduroy jacket and elbow patches and had most of his lunch on his tie. But he dramatically put on his white coat to prove to us that he was a proper scientist, and he had transformed into Dr. Amazing. 15 minutes into the presentation, we were all transfixed. Dr. Amazing had produced bangs and flashes and demonstrated how to make a custard tin flash bomb. Most of the boys were, for the first time in their science education, taking notes. Then Dr. Amazing moved on from fire to the ice section of his presentation. Excuse me. On the table, he placed a large flask with white fumes billowing from the top. He explained the flask contained liquid nitrogen, cooled to, what temperature, boys? Hands up. Minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit, piped up the class smarty pants called Julian, who was sat next to me. Julian was the class cleverclogs and knew everything about everything. He was really annoying. His dad was the local vicar, which wasn't his fault, but it didn't help. Right. Grinning at Julian, Dr. Amazing then produced a large pair of tongs and a banana and carefully lowered the banana into the flask of liquid nitrogen. I said quietly, I bet that's going to taste like banana ice cream. Do you think? Said Julian, innocently enough. Well, Dr. Amazing then lifted the banana out of the flask and placed it on the desk. He picked up a large hammer and smashed it down on the banana. Now comes the weird moment. The banana spectacularly shattered into thousands of pieces, with one large lump arcing its way through the air towards the class SWAT, Julian, sitting next to me. My world now went into 3D slow motion as the banana lump tumbled through the air, But Julian, with his amazing reactions, now, as I gazed at him, had his mouth wide open. Both of his eyes were focused on the tumbling banana lump.
Excellent.
He caught it perfectly. For a moment, a flicker of triumph graced his smug face. Now, the problem was the still super-cool banana lump was cold. In fact, very, very cold. In fact, you might remember, minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit. It immediately sealed itself to the inside of Julian's mouth in about a nanosecond. Yanking the banana out didn't help, as Julian's finger then stuck to the banana, neither of which could be removed from his mouth. Doc White, our beloved science master, actually turned white and fainted. Thud. Everything in about 2 seconds flat. I'm pleased to tell you that both Julian and Doc White soon recovered, and after a short interlude, Dr. Amazing insisted on completing his demonstration. This is my favourite bit. Julian was given a handful of paper towels, and although trembling a little, was told to stop showing off.
Different times, everyone. Different times.
Well, Doc White was sent to recover in the staff room with a nice cup of tea and a woodbine.
Oh, indeed.
Again,
yeah, of course.
Different times. Julian was back to eating solid food in just a couple of weeks.
Oh, just 2 weeks.
It transpired over the following days that he could speak perfectly well as long as he stuck his tongue out first.
Yeah.
So I asked forgiveness from Julian because I had mentioned the ice cream thought, though I don't really think it was my fault. Anyway, and from Doc White, who I really did not know would faint at the faintest sight of blood, I asked forgiveness. Tim in Barnsley. Well, Science and Chemistry Confessions always gratefully received, particularly from people like Dr. Amazing, which is a fascinating thing. But obviously, super cool nitrogen and a banana. A lot of people will have seen that experiment, and it turns the banana absolutely cold, so you can shatter it. But then you just have to be wearing gloves. And don't try that at home. What have you got there, Sister?
Is Dr. Amazing a precursor of Dr. Marsh, do you think? So similar qualities, I felt.
Could have an interesting thought.
Yeah. I think even though Tim had suggested this ice cream thing with the banana, it was Julian the Swat's fault, because he was showing off trying to catch... He meant to catch it in his mouth, didn't he?
And all he said was, I bet it tastes like banana ice cream, which is not
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he didn't cause Julian to show off and be an annoying clever clogs. And even though I do feel a bit sorry for Julian, because he suffered for days after that, I don't think there's any long-term harm done, so I'm going to forgive.
Bobby from the Prior is on.
Yeah, simple. Also, Julian got a bit of, kind of admiration. He became Julian Frozen Banana Mouth instead of Julian the Idiot.
That's very much the nickname all of us boys are after.
That's right.
When you're at school, you want to be known as Frozen Banana Mouth.
Of course you forgive him. It's not your fault, Tim.
I did actually remove the bit that he did get a nickname after that, but I removed that.
Good.
But anyway, Brother Matthew, what have you got to say?
The reason, I mean, we say different times, and this clearly is from different times, because there is no way you get this kind of fun experiment now without... It would have to take place in between bulletproof glass, everyone's wearing goggles and overcoats, and it's not the same. And some would say, quite right too, because we shouldn't have frozen bananas being
kids,
thrown at children.
don't catch frozen bananas.
In your mouth, quite right too. So for that reason, I am going to forgive.
Oh, you are going to forgive?
Yes.
It's another drive time confession. Gather round to hear Mike's story. Mike, thank you very much indeed for the email. Simon Mayo at confessions at bbc.co.uk. Dear Father Simon and the Collective, this story takes place when I was a brand new, wet behind the ears pilot in the RAF. Back in the early 2000s, one of the main tasks of our squadron was patrolling the skies over northern Iraq on something called, with typical military imagination, Operation Northern Watch. We would spend a month at a time flying over Iraq from this Air Force base in Turkey, home to several thousand Americans and not quite so many plucky Brits. Being enormous and full of Americans, it had all the creature comforts that you could possibly wish for. Supermarkets, restaurants, bars, gyms and swimming pools. The shops were just like downtown USA and were stocked once a fortnight when the enormous US Air Force Galaxy C5 arrived. Sadly, we were generally limited to life behind the wire, but it was still a fun place to spend some time. Being new, I was paired up to fly with one of the more senior chaps on the squadron. Let's call him Tim. He was the detachment commander, which meant that as well as flying the missions, he was required to attend numerous dull meetings with boring administrative and engineering types, as well as, horror of horrors, the incredibly uptight detachment commanders from the various American squadrons who were based there. Now, the flying was quite monotonous. Not as monotonous as poor Tim's meetings, and days were long with early starts, but the partying more than made up for it. And the parties that everyone, and by everyone I mean all the American ladies, wanted to come to were thrown by the Brits. They loved our accents, they loved the cocktails that we mixed, and we loved them right back. So, I just added emphasis, and I pointed as though I was in a boy band.
Yeah.
So, just in case.
You never know. Call could come.
You never
Can you
know.
get off your stool when they do a key change? Yes,
Probably.
you can.
Can't do a key change.
Yeah.
So at the end of our month there, we decided to throw the party to end all parties. All week, Tim dispatched us around the base, handing out invitations to every American girl we saw, promising them free beer, cocktails, food, dancing, and the chance to mix with the Brits. The next day had been designated a no-fly day. We were planning on making this Friday night a memorable one. Friday duly arrived, and after a hard day's flying, the party began. The weather was glorious, the barbecue was lit, the cocktails mixed, and the girls arrived. Simon, it was a great night, lasting long into the wee small hours. Tim, unfortunately, did not. The endless treadmill of flying and meetings had taken its toll on our poor detachment commander, and as the clock struck 11, he was asleep. Not asleep in his bed, no, he was asleep in a chair in the middle of the party, a party full of his subordinates. Now, Father Simon, I know because you've said many times that you don't want hair removal stories, which is true. That is true, I have said that. And this is not one of those. Instead, one of the American girls produced a bottle of nail varnish and painted Tim's nails a fetching shade of scarlet. After all, nail varnish comes off, doesn't it? As invariably happens, the wee small hours turned into the morning. The party was grinding to a finish as the sun appeared. The clean-up began, Tim was woken from his slumber, and he shambled off bedwards. I was exhausted, but before sleep, I needed some food, so I staggered off to the supermarket. As I wandered through the freshly restocked aisles, I happened upon the cosmetics aisle, where the nail varnish lived, and also the nail varnish remover. So I bought some. Well, actually, when I say some, I actually mean I bought all of it. Every single bottle. When I got back to my accommodation, I microwaved my taco, not a euphemism, says Mike, poured every single drop of nail varnish remover down the sink, and I went to sleep. When I woke, there was consternation. Tim was due in the weekly detachment commanders meeting. The big important one with the top brass. Uptight American top brass at that. And while he looked terribly smart in his uniform, there was no mistaking his bright red talons. His foray to the supermarket to remedy this situation had proved fruitless. The manager had been sure they had a delivery of nail varnish remover just the other day, but he couldn't find it anywhere. Tim wasn't allowed off base to get some. What was he to do? He couldn't go to a meeting like that. He couldn't spend the whole 2 hours there with his hands in his pockets. The answer became obvious. He had to wear gloves. The leather flying gloves that all RAF pilots are issued with. Yes, it was Turkey in the summertime. Yes, it was 32 degrees outside. Yes, the meeting was firmly on the ground and not in the aircraft, but Tim decided that the glove wearing was the lesser of two embarrassments. Not just that day, but for the next 5 days, while the nail varnish gradually chipped and was peeled off. I have to say, he did look a bit ridiculous by the swimming pool in his trunks and gloves. Has that ever happened? I don't think anyone that... No, it's not a good idea. Father Simon, I seek forgiveness not from Tim, who, intriguingly, is now a very, very senior officer in the Air Force, so it can't have done him any harm in the long run, but particularly from all the lovely American girls who had to spend the next 2 weeks with chipped nails because they couldn't get the nail varnish remover that they wanted. Well, it's an unforeseen casualty of that particular prank. Mike, thank you very much indeed. Let's see what sister... Normally, I have to say, most military confessions are the ones that never make it to air. But this one did. I liked it. Thank you very much indeed. Rebecca, what do you think?
I thought it was a great confession.
Yes.
He probably came across as an uptight Brit it in the meetings with the American commanders. They probably thought, who's this eccentric man with the gloves on in the hot Turkish weather? I don't really understand why he couldn't have borrowed some nail varnish remover from somebody, one of the American ladies perhaps, but maybe they weren't in the same place as him.
Maybe they weren't, no.
I thought that Mike went a bit far by... I mean, it's mean enough painting someone's nails, but to go and buy all the nail varnish in town and then pour it away. So I think he went a bit far, actually, and I'm not going to forgive.
No forgiveness. OK, Bobby from the Priory.
Yeah, I feel a bit troubled. Why couldn't he find in the mechanics, a mechanics toolbox, some kind of fluid that would help to get it off? Well, nail varnish chips off really quickly and
Terps?
stays on forever. There could have been something that he found.
Would terps work? White spirit?
I never tried it.
Is that still a thing?
No, don't put that on your skin, obviously.
No, on your nails.
Yeah,
That's not the same.
It's near enough, isn't it?
I'm sure there were time limits because he had a meeting, so I understand that. And the other thing is the nail varnish was kind of hijinks of the moment, but the removing of the nail varnish remover was product of forethought. So, Mike, unforgiven.
Harsh from Bobby. What do you think there, brother Matt?
Well, number one, never fall asleep at a party. I think we all know that. So obviously that's a rule. So you deserve everything you get. And the other is you're definitely forgiven for introducing the euphemism "microwave my taco." Can't come down now, dear. I'm just microwaving my taco.
Well,
yeah. So yes. So for that reason alone, I'm going to forgive.
So what do we have here? We have another drive-time confession. That's what this is. Thank you very much indeed for tonight's tale, which appears to be anonymous, so let's call him Nigel.
Hey.
Dear Simon and the ever-forgiving, angelic, hallowed, wise collective, this is a confession that has been weighing me down for many, many years. The event occurred back in the early 90s when I was a young, single, keen graphic designer working for a small local newspaper. It was here I made some very good friends who I often socialised with in a small local pub in the heart of the Herefordshire countryside. Now, it was a Friday leading up to Christmas, and my boss at the time kindly told the workforce to down tools early. Ran to the car park and met up with my chums. It was obvious that we would go down to the village pub. By mid-afternoon, the burping, bad jokes and mutual backslapping was well underway. With the moods fueled, smoky bacon crisps as the only solid sustenance, the afternoon was progressing as planned. By 5 o'clock, the inevitable happened, and we hit the wall, so to speak, and had reached our limit. It was time to go home. The problem is that I lived 15 miles away, and it suddenly occurred to me I had not ordered a cab. Fortunately, my best friend stepped in. Tell you what, he says, you can stay at mine. We have just had a new loft conversion, and I'm sure my parents wouldn't mind you staying over. Well, I really didn't fancy walking 15 miles in the dark and cold in the middle of December on small country roads, so I jumped at the chance. We said our farewells to our colleagues and stumbled back to his period cottage with a converted loft. Now, one thing I did know is that it's wise to drink lots of water before retiring. So this is exactly what I did. I quickly drank several pints of cold water in quick succession, followed by a large mug of strong coffee. Is that the right thing to do? Nigel?
The coffee could be... you'd be up for all the wrong reasons with the coffee, wouldn't you?
Shall we find out? My friend then showed me to the loft bedroom. To get access, you had to climb a ladder. At the top was a small hatch which allowed access to a rather nice, pristine, fresh paint-smelling bedroom. The first thing I saw was a freshly made, soft, inviting bed. I thought I was in heaven. I stripped to my boxers, threw my clothes on the floor and collapsed in a heap on the bed. Sleep was absolutely instantaneous. And this is where my good fortune ends, and my life changed forever. I woke abruptly a few hours later, as you do, desperate for the loo. Now, under usual circumstances, one would jump out of bed, switch the light on and trot to the loo, refresh and return. This was not usual circumstances. The room was absolutely black. When I say black, I mean properly black. There was absolutely no light whatsoever. The village had no street lights to leak through the curtains. There was no bright moon and no sneaky cracks under the doors to allow your eyes to adapt to low light. Again, in a familiar place you could navigate to the exit. Not here. I had no idea where the exit was. Plus, it was hidden somewhat on the floor. Even worse. I painfully put both feet on the floor and slowly stood up. I put my hands in front of me and took a couple of tentative steps forward, but only a few steps. My right foot got caught on my discarded jeans and I crashed face down onto the floor. At this stage, I started to panic. You'll remember, I'm desperate. But I had a plan. I would remain on the floor and carefully roll sideways across the floor, looking for anything that I could touch and perhaps recognise. After what seemed to be a painful eternity, my hands touched something. It was the hatch door handle. I regained my composure, twisted and lifted. The door to freedom opened and I could see a stream of light. I stood up, focused, and descended the ladder as quickly as possible. By this time, I have to say, I was sweating. On the landing, I saw a door. Must be the loo. I was saved. At this point, I was beyond desperate. I thought it was just past midnight, so the chances of anybody being awake, not an issue. I dropped my boxers, sprinted, and threw the door open. In front of me sat innocently in a large double bed and reading bed-sized books were my friend's middle-aged parents. I froze. They froze. The whole world froze. His eyes met mine. My eyes met his. My eyes met hers. Her eyes met something else.
Oh, dear.
You must be Barry, she said.
Yeah.
It's a bit late for visitors. It's from Barry.
Yes, but say it's from Barry. Okay, yeah.
For what seemed like an eternity, we all just stayed in frozen, animated pose. My first thought after a few terrible moments was to retreat. Now, to this day, I don't know why I retreated in such a ridiculous way. It's hard to explain exactly how I did it, but I will try to give you the picture. I used very short, shuffled backward steps and started bowing in that stupid way where you do it repeatedly while spinning your hand around as if you're retreating from medieval royalty. My other hand was cupped. I backed out of the door, bowing and scraping. I eventually and thankfully found the toilet, but I was too traumatised to feel any relief at all. All I could see burned onto my retina were the faces of my friends' parents. The morning did come, and all too fast. I did my best to delay the inevitable in the vain hope that they would leave the house early. Took a long shower. Took even longer to get dressed, but I could put it off no more. Took a deep breath, crept down the stairs, entered the kitchen. "Good morning," I said. No reply. "Thanks for letting me stay." "I'll get my coat." To say the atmosphere was frosty would be a massive understatement. I was never invited back. We didn't speak later. Forgiveness, please, for my naked intrusion. In my defence, though, I was desperate, so hopefully, Simon, this will be taken into consideration. Well, let's see if that is indeed a mitigating circumstance. I do feel it's pretty... If you're desperate, but you need to know where you're going. And if you're stuck in the top of the house with no visible door at all, that was a problem.
That was very funny, that the idea of him in this pitch-black room, and he didn't remember where the light switch was.
Rolling
obviously,
around.
had no idea where the exit was. It was days before mobile phones, of course. I mean, we would have just grabbed it from the bedside and used it as a light,
Good
wouldn't
point,
we?
yes.
But I think he was a bit previous in pulling down his boxers before he actually found
Yes.
the loo. So for that reason, I am not forgiving Barry.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of his fault, isn't it, really, given the amount of water that he'd drunk as he came out from his evening out. Anyway, Novice, what do you think?
Well, I thought down the hatch in many ways. I thought that's what was going to happen to him.
Not bad.
Not bad. Thank you.
Down
I thought he was going to roll down the hatch. I thought he might have ended up doing something terrible in a cupboard. But who? Barry, maybe you can call me Nigel, whatever his real name is. Barry. Why on earth pull your boxer shorts down before you go into a loo or a bathroom? Not knowing.
I'm not defending him.
No, well, he wasn't. He had to defend himself, didn't he? As he cupped and went backwards for Christmas. So all I would say, Barry, your plonker on this occasion, not forgiven.
He's on form. It's like a whole stand-up routine we've got there. Brother Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, we've already addressed why you shouldn't remove your boxer shorts before you actually go into the room in order to go to the loo. But here's a point I would make.
Yes.
It appears to me there is a massive design flaw in this loft, in that they know that there's no lights anywhere, and that they're in the middle of nowhere, so there's no street lights. So this is going to happen all the time. Why are they not putting the light right next to the bed so that you can put the light on from there? And for that reason alone, I'm going to forgive, because it's entirely their own fault.
So the people who own the house, the old
Yes,
folks,
you need to have
their
a
fault.
big light switch next to the bed.
Well, they were this week's confessions. Who did you forgive? And if it made you think of your own shadowy secret, on an email, please, confessions@bbc.co.uk. More in a week, and the Weekly Mayo if you fancy some more. Thanks.